Good afternoon and evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us to go through basic betta care. I'm your host, Dr. Jessie Sanders of Aquatic Veterinary Services out of Santa Cruz, California. Before we get started, if you're unfamiliar with using the GoToWebinar platform, if you look at your little bar on the right, there will be an area there for questions. If you do have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to enter them there, and I will get to them towards the end. Please keep in mind that this is a beginner-oriented presentation, so what we're going to be covering here is for all of you beginner betta keepers. If you do have more advanced questions, we're happy to help you with those, and we can answer those by email at a later date. So starting out, we'll be talking all about bettas, go through some anatomy and physiology, go over some basic tank requirements, along with nutrition, basic care and maintenance, and some common illnesses that are very common to beginners. So first, starting out, all about bettas. So first of all, we are going to settle how you pronounce the word beta. Do you say beta or betta? Well, I've done a lot of research on this, and actually the correct pronunciation is betta. So I am still learning how to do this and make sure my brain gets rewired, so I apologize if I use the incorrect pronunciation. But certainly if you say the word betta fish, everyone will still know what you're talking about. So please keep in mind that this will work no matter what your crowd. So a little bit about the betta fish. They are cousins to gouramis, and here's some phylogeny information for you. They belong to a group called the labyrinth fishes. Now, these fish have a labyrinth organ, which you can kind of think of as a very primal lung. These fish are actually able to extract oxygen from the air. They do have gills that do the same thing of any other fish in the water. And this is an adaptation that they have cultivated over many, many generations to survive in low oxygen environments. So stagnant puddles, maybe the water quality isn't great, but you have enough oxygen in the air, these fish can survive very well. They are native to Thailand, but bred throughout Southeast Asia. They're a very widely cultured fish and have a global range as far as in captivity, not in the wild. You may have heard of them referred to as the Siamese fighting fish. This is actually more descriptive of the species Betta splendens, which is also referred to as the splendid battler. In this case, the males are very territorial, and they are trained to fight when bred in a very, very small space. So betta fish are not naturally fighters. They are actually bred to do this, just given their training as a very young individual. Now, these betta fish that are fighters are not the pretty long fin variety that most of you probably think of. Those long fins are not very helpful in a fight. So usually the fighting betta fish have very big heads with big muscly jaws and slightly smaller fins. Female bettas are not as brightly colored, and they can get along in groups or with other communal species. There are many different species of betta fish that have many different genuses, and we'll be touching on a couple of them, but these different species vary in range and adaptations. Most of what we're going to be covering today is just on the Betta splendens. This is what you find most commonly in the pet trade. If you're interested in learning more about the different varieties of betta fish, please check out the International Betta Congress. They have all of the classes of bettas defined, and they are responsible for promoting the hobby and putting on betta shows. There are also local clubs in your area that you can join and kind of get a better idea of what goes into producing all these wonderful varieties of fish. Moving on to anatomy and physiology. So external betta anatomy is very similar to almost every other fish species, with the exception of their extremely elongated anal fin, dorsal fin, and caudal fin. You can see there that they take up almost their entire length of their body and can be very long. They also have a little short one up in the front, the pelvic fin, that can actually cover the anal fin as well. But they got the same eyes, mouth, gills, fins, all that good stuff that goes with every other fish. Betta fish in particular are pectoral swimmers, so rather than use their tail for a lot of their propulsion, you'll see them using their pectoral fins to kind of scull around and use that for most of their mobility, which is a unique characteristic to these fish. This is a very crude internal interpretation of a betta fish. I'm sorry I could not find you a better picture. In the front there, you can see the entrance into the labyrinth organ that they're using to draw oxygen from the air. Other than that, they have all the same parts as another fish. So their anatomy is very similar to all fish, except for that labyrinth organ and the use of their pectoral fins for swimming. Like most fish, they have a swim bladder that's used to regulate buoyancy. Their fins that we pointed out are lengthened with genetic strength breeding, so this has been bred into these fish over a long period of time to have these very long ornate fins. Betta fish also have a unique membrane around their operculum known as the beard. Operculum is basically the gill plate cover there. They will flare this out to increase their perceived size to other bettas and also the veterinarian. You can think of this as a similar mechanism to a cat arching and fluffing its back out, or a pufferfish puffing up in order to make itself look too big for another animal to swallow. So again, this is one of those things that has been bred into these fish from a fighting perspective, but they use it on the veterinarian just as much. Betta also have a very unique adaptation to breeding. So a few of these species, most commonly kept the splendens, the bellica, and the coxina groups, will make bubble nests. So if you imagine these fishes' adaptations to low oxygen environments, having a bubble nest up by the surface is going to keep your eggs safe and also keep them in the highest oxygen-rich surface water. So again, this is one of those adaptations for low oxygen water. You will see this in bettas that have not paired off. We have seen it sometimes in our males, and it is a very unique behavior, something that all betta owners need to be aware of. Some less common genuses are actually mouth brooders. So what does this mean? This means that a few betta species will take the fertilized eggs into their mouth and keep them safe until they're hatched into fry and then are able to swim out. So this is a little bit different from the more commonly kept species that you may see, but certainly is not uncommon for some of the lesser known genuses. So before moving on to basic tank requirements, does anybody have any questions about betta fish anatomy, history, or physiology? All right, we got one question on the colors. Yes, betta fish come in a wide variety of colors, and a lot of this is through basic genetics. These fish have multiple color variations that are all through different types of pigments in their skin. They can go all the way from a very dark black to white, and that will change based on their diet, their genetic strength, the water conditioning. Lots of different things can influence betta color, and sometimes it's not a finite color pattern. Fish do change over time with, again, diet and water quality. So excellent question. Yes, betta color genetics are very complex, and I have a great book on the subject if you want to do that. We have one other question. And it says, how are domestic bettas different from their wild counterparts, if at all? Well, certainly the domestic ones that have been bred obviously for their color patterns and long fins would not really get along well in the wild environment. However, there are certain groups of people who love the wild types rather than the cultured ones. And certainly those fish that have been kind of allowed to breed wildly, like I said before, don't have that innate fighting ability that is actually bred into them, just given how their brain can have the potential to be wired. So it's a lot of the same diet, or at least it can be if you want it to be. But the domestic and wild counterparts of these betta fish are actually very closely linked. So, another question, they are resistant to ammonia and nitrate. Certainly if the water quality around them, they can use oxygen in the environment and keep their gills from being affected by the ammonia and the nitrate. Unfortunately, this is not something that's going to be a long-term strategy. This is something that they do to survive. So we'll be talking a little bit about that and some basic water quality and tank requirements in a minute. So moving on. So as I just mentioned, betta fish have adapted to very low oxygen environments with poor water quality. This is an adaptation that is used in the short-term survival. So the creek is dried up and you need to live for a little while longer. You need to make sure that you at least have a puddle where you can get some air from the surface. However, these fish cannot persist indefinitely with these conditions. So yes, they can live in a bowl that, say, isn't cleaned very well, but unfortunately, this isn't going to be a long-term survival option. And what we here at Aquatic Veterinary Services, our goal is to make sure that all fish have a good quality of life for as long as possible. So we want to make sure that they have the tank that they deserve. Yes, these betta fish can be more aggressive with less space. Keep in mind this is, again, an operant conditioning that has been bred into them. Not all betta fish will be aggressive. Some that are cultured in very, very large systems are extremely less aggressive than their other counterparts. We found that we have the best results from our bettas when they're treated like other tropical fish. What does this mean? So this is our little friend Hiccup. He has a little betta tank that he loves so much that he tried to go swimming in it. You can see the tape there on top has been put on to protect the little betta fish. So really, if you're going to have one of the male betta fish, we recommend at least a 2-gallon tank. The bigger, the better. This will be a fish that will probably be by himself. So if you have lots of room, it will be less maintenance for you and a more fun environment for your fish. No matter what size tank you use, you want to make sure that you have adequate filtration for the tank. We recommend using a filter that has an adjustable flow. You're going to want to dial it all the way back. These fins will catch a lot of the current and push your fish around the tank. So being able to control the flow is extremely important. You really want to avoid pointy decor. This can actually tear very delicate fins. And there are betta-specific plants. You can see one in the tank there on the left. It's a nice green one. These are silk flower plants, and they are a lot safer to use for the betta fish. So there's an example of what might not be considered pointy for a lot of other fish, but we have had betta fish that have damaged their fins on these little pointy edges here. So we certainly recommend for the health and safety of the betta fish to remove that pointy decor. Keep in mind that betta fish are not as active as other species. You need to make sure they have plenty of resting perches to chill out for a little bit. Unfortunately, pectoral swimming takes a lot more effort than just using your tail, and pulling all those fins around is quite a workout. So make sure that your betta fish have a nice place to rest. There are lots of different ones you can choose from. And here's Little Blue in his cave there. You can see him just hanging out. We have found that betta fish do best at between 77 and 82 degrees, so it's always recommended to add a heater with a betta tank. You can see Blue has his behind there. A lot of the preset heaters that are available will actually end up in this range, so that works out great. You always want to make sure that you have a thermometer that you can rely on to make sure that your heater is working properly. As with any other tank, you want to make sure it is kept out of direct sunlight. This will cause extreme temperature fluctuations, especially since this is a smaller system usually, and it will also increase your algae growth. So, a couple things to keep in mind. Touching briefly on nutrition, the wild diet of these bettas will be bugs, aquatic invertebrates such as slugs and snails, smaller fish, and zooplankton. It's quite a varied diet. And it can vary significantly between the fry and the adults. So with most of the adults that you'll be having as pets, variety is the key if you're feeding a non-commercial diet. Again, this is not recommended for beginners, but certainly all these snacks are good to have in your arsenal if you have a picky fish that is just not going to want to eat a commercial diet. You have your crustaceans, Artemia and Daphnia, along with small worms and insects, but most of you will be most familiar with the commercial betta diets that are available. All of these are excellent choices. There's many more. These are just the ones that we have on our shelves currently. Certainly, the only thing you really have to be aware of is the size of these pellets because they vary widely throughout. If you have any questions about fish nutrition in general, we do have another webinar that covers all the basics of what fish need in their diet to be big and healthy. And it goes through how to read a nutritional label on a thing of pet food in order to make yourself a better pet owner. But certainly starting out, plenty of commercial diets. We have some betta fish that are very picky and only like one brand, but that's fine. They're all about the same price and they're all great for your fish. On to one of the most important questions we get with betta fish. How much should I feed? So first you want to keep in mind how big their stomach is versus how big your pellets are. Like I said before, there is a lot of discrepancies in the different brands on how big those pellets will be. So 3 pellets of one brand could be the equivalent of 9 pellets in another brand. So what we recommend, again, this is a very, very broad guideline. We can make better recommendations if you give us a little more information. We do about 3 to 6 pellets twice daily. And these are fish that are kept in slightly larger systems. I think the smallest we have one in right now is 3.5 gallons. You can break these into multiple feedings per day. We really don't recommend only doing one feeding. You can always do one slightly heavier feeding and then one light feeding. But especially in these warmer temperatures, these fish tend to do better with smaller meals throughout the day, just like people. Our in-house bettas receive 3 pellets twice a day, except 1 day a week. On our days off, they only get 1 3-pellet meal. And we haven't had any issues with any fish that have ballooned up. We have seen fish that have come in being constipated from just having way too much food. Certainly, if your fish is showing signs of an enlarged abdomen and lethargy, take a look at that diet and make sure that it is the right amount for the little fish size. Remember that the fish you're looking at, his abdominal component is only about 1/3 to 1/4 of his actual body. His stomach is probably just the same size as his eyeball. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about how many pellets to stuff in there. Keep in mind that fish do not save food for later. So if you see extra pellets floating around your tank, it's not really incentive for them to go out and eat them later. Betta fish can be fed using the vacation tablets that are available. Since it is one fish, it will usually be sufficient. We always recommend that if you can avoid using those, that is best. Unfortunately, those nutrients will leach into the environment and wreak a little havoc with your water quality. So please keep in mind when you're going on vacation, if you have someone to come in and feed your fish, that would be great. But if not, those vacation tablets are just fine. On to some basic care and maintenance. So for those of you who are familiar with our webinars, this will be very straightforward. So as far as regular water changes go, the frequency will depend on the size of your system. Keep in mind that these recommendations are made by having one fish in a tank. So the male fish here. If you have less than 5 gallons, we recommend 10% weekly or 25% every other week. Again, this is for basic beginners who have not had any experience with a fish tank before. After you have established your system, we recommend testing your water very carefully, and you'll be able to dial in how frequently you have to do these water changes. So this is just starting out. And then if you have one betta fish in over 5 gallons, you can do 10% every other week or 25% monthly. Apologize, the first one should be less than or equal to 5 gallons. So 5 gallons on the dot, 10% weekly, or 25% every other week. We highly recommend using a gravel siphon to get into those cracks and crevices and getting those leftover food and feces. You can see Sarah on the right there demonstrating how to use one in a larger tank. They do have them available for tiny little betta tanks, and they are very, very much worth your money. Any decor you get, you want to make sure you scrub it outside of the tank. Just given those small systems, scrubbing that can muck it up quite a bit. And always remember your dechlorinator. All right, on to the common illnesses. So again, this is at a very beginner level. If you need help with a specific issue, we request that you call our office directly. We do have a betta-specific webpage on our website that we can help troubleshoot a couple things. So betta fish are one of the most commonly surrendered fish to our office. 85% of these bettas that I either see on appointments or them surrendered usually have secondary infections or disease to poor water quality. And this is including inadequate temperature. We have fixed many a betta fish by giving them clean, heated water. And all the other issues tend to reduce drastically. So if you have a problem with your betta, I highly, highly, highly recommend starting with the water quality. And again, we have other webinars on this as well. I'll be giving you some links to a bunch of, all this information will be summarized at the end. So if you're taking notes, I promise we'll have it in writing at the end. So the enlarged belly, first thing you want to do is examine the diet. The quality of the diet, the amount that you're feeding, and the timing. Certainly if you're giving them one big meal once a day, that can cause their little tummies to swell up and have a hard time digesting. So we highly recommend spreading out into smaller, tinier meals throughout the day, and that tends to take care of most of the enlarged belly that is related to diet. Fish can get fat too. Yes, any kind of fish, we have seen it in koi, goldfish, and the betta fish, that sometimes they're just eating junk and it's not the correct protein, not enough fat, too many carbohydrates, and they can get fat too. So certainly an enlarged belly could just be fat. Coelomic cysts and tumors are fairly common in betta fish. Coelomic just refers to their abdominal cavity. It's just the technical term for these guys. These will require veterinary care. These need to be perforated and drained and then mixed with some drugs. Again, sometimes these cysts or tumors could be secondary to a mycobacterium infection. This is a very serious problem because it is a zoonotic disease, which means it can transmit to humans. Yes, you. This is one of the few bacteria that can actually jump over to humans. If you do have a mycobacterium infection, there is no treatment or cure available, no matter what you read on the internet. I hate it when these infections occur because it's really just about the quality of life for the fish, and you have to be very careful of how you take care of the tank. If you do have a betta fish that's on a fairly reasonable diet and still has an enlarged belly, it needs to be seen by a veterinarian. To find a fish veterinarian near you, you can visit fishvets.org. This is the database for the American Association of Fish Veterinarians, or aquavetmed.info, and this is the database for the World Aquatic Veterinary Medical Association. So big belly, not something you want to mess around with. Very commonly, we will see fin rips and tears. These can be secondary to many illnesses, including stress. It's just very delicate tissue that if nutrition or metabolism needs to be shunted to another part of the body to keep that immune up and functioning, the fins and all those very peripheral parts are going to be the first to go. So first things first, we're going to check our water quality and assess the tank decor. So we had that little picture before of a innocent looking plant, but unfortunately they will have issues with those plants. Certainly if they're startled, they can run into them. So make sure that all of your plants are Betta safe. These fins are very delicate tissue and they may or may not regrow fully. It really depends on the extent of the damage and how it was first suffered. We have had some fish that grow back to their full lovely tails. We have had others that are just going to be little stumpy guys for life. And unfortunately, since they don't really need that tail and they're doing their pectoral swimming, that's really the fins that we are most worried about. So the loss of a tail really isn't going to affect little Betta's choice in lifestyle. So something to keep in mind, make sure those pectoral fins are working the way they're supposed to. Fin rips and tears. These do not necessarily warrant antibiotic treatment. So all those lovely powders you can get over the counter at any pet store, keep in mind these are not regulated products. So whatever you have in that box there might not be what it says it is. It might not be effective. I think a lot of these products work just because they make you do so many water changes. So if you have an issue with this and you're unable to check your water quality, doing a couple water changes could be the problem to the solution, the solution to the problem without reaching for the antibiotics. And again, listlessness and lethargy. Please keep in mind, bettas are not very active fish compared to a lot of other species. There's a lot of weight coming from that long fins and tails. It's important that you see what happens during feeding time. So I'll equivocate this to the lovely flu outbreak that we've had going on. So a lot of doctors have been putting silly signs up in their waiting rooms. They ask everybody with the flu, please stand up and we'll get you to the front of the line. And everybody who stands up, great, you're not sick, go home. Certainly if a betta fish does not want their meal, they need to be taken care of. If they're just kind of lazy, but as soon as the food comes out, they whiz to the top, they're probably just a little bit lazy. And that's very, very common with these fish. However, when they are having these issues, we're going to check that water quality right again. I won't stop saying it. And especially the temperature is very important to check. Certainly, if you don't have a thermometer in your tank, you're going to go out and get one, because even with a little bit of a cool down, it can drop their metabolism and basically make them as slow as molasses. So keep that in mind if you have a fish that is not as active as you think it should be. See what happens during feeding time and get a thermometer. So back to a little bit of what we were talking about earlier. Color changes in betta fish can vary with genetics, diet, water quality, stress, age, etc., etc. Really, the one appearance you need to be worried about is a kind of frosted appearance. Basically, this is an increase in the mucus coating of the betta fish. This occurs when the fish's immune system is trying to protect its external self. And again, with this, it's usually secondary to water quality. And if you checked your water quality, everything looks great, you're going to have the vet come out and check for parasites. Yep, even betta fish can get parasites and disease just like everything else. And one of the most common questions we get are blue fish with red streaks. This can be normal or abnormal. This is a betta fish that we actually have in our office. Unfortunately, that blue light makes those blue pigments come out really well. But you can see in its tail, it has a few little red streaks. Now, this is completely normal for this fish. And that's just the way it's going to be for him. So it's not anything to be worried about, but certainly if you see red streaks and it's not there before, it can be very alarming to a new betta owner. You can always send us a picture, give us a little description, change in diet. Did they just come to you? Did they get a new tank? All of that stuff can be impacting its overall color. So a few additional resources for those of you if you would like more information on betta fish. We have some lovely free brochures that are available to anyone who wants them on betta keeping, water quality, tank maintenance. We do have some others on pond maintenance and goldfish. And then if you click that there, it will take you to our website. Just give us your mailing address and we will send them on down. We do have a betta page on our website. A lot of this information that we went over today is available there, and it can help troubleshoot a lot of the common problems that we see with betta fish. So certainly if you're having an issue, check out that page, make sure that everything is going all right. Sorry, hit the mic. We also recommend that if you're very interested in keeping betta fish, that you join a betta club. In California, I believe there is one up in San Francisco and one down in San Diego. So hopefully if you're close to one, you can join up. If not, I'm sure you can start one of your own. Just check out that, again, the International Betta Congress will have more information on this. And then books. Books are always great to have for betta references. We have the two on the right in our store if you want to stop by and read them. The Boo and Bubbles series is a series of books that I myself has written to get families used to and interested in having pet fish at home. So it's a great series that walks you through all the steps of what you need to have in your tank, how to acclimate fish, how to clean their tanks, and what to do when they get sick. We'll have a new one coming out this year that goes through quarantining new additions of fish. But again, if it's a beginner fish with a betta, you're not going to be adding them anyway. Website for that is booandbubbles.com. So with that, thank you very much for attending. I hope you were able to get something out of this presentation. And does anybody have any questions? All right, one question here. I've had my betta in a bowl with no filter for about 18 months and he's doing fine. Yes, so obviously that is the stigma these days that betta fish will do okay in bowls. And yes, it's okay for them. Certainly, we try to equivocate it to, okay, you're a person and you're trapped in an elevator. Yes, there is enough air for you to live. I mean, your waste isn't going to go anywhere. It's just going to sit around. And eventually the doors will open, the cleaning crew will come, clean up the poop and all that, let some fresh air in, but then the doors close again and you're trapped in this little box. Well, certainly wouldn't you like some facilities that are going to break down your poop and clean it up and scrub it? And maybe a little bit of filter, a little bit of AC, a little bit of climate control. So yes, bowls are cheap and easy, and your fish will survive. They will not thrive, however. And our goal is really to make sure that fish have an appropriate environment where they thrive and do really well and have the best quality of life. So yes, we recognize that bowls and bettas have gone together for a very long time, but it is highly recommended that you get him upgraded to a nice little tank. There are lots of tanks that have that nice low flow that bettas like. And certainly even the ones that have a little higher flow, we have some that just like to sleep on the intake because they don't have to swim as much. If you do have any additional questions, you can reach us on our website on the Betta page there. You can call our office at 831-346-6151. And if you need to email our hospital directly, you can email hospital@cafishvet.com. I see there's one more question. What about bacteria living in food like bloodworms? Are there any dangers of feeding live foods? Certainly, if you're getting a food that has been bred and never frozen, there is always an issue or potential issue with, yes, it could have bacteria. Keep in mind that the species that are riding around on them aren't always going to infect fish. Certainly the ones that are frozen are a little bit safer. Unfortunately, you can never guarantee that any food you feed is going to be completely safe for fish. Some of these questions here, unfortunately, are a little long, so I will answer them all through email. Thank you very much for attending our Betta question and webinar today. I hope you all have a lovely afternoon and evening, and we'll see you at another webinar soon. Thank you.